Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for the Nasdaq Dorsey Wright podcast on this Monday, October 25th. My name is Ian Saunders, and then joining us here as well today is Will Gibson. And Will, we're coming into quite an eventful week for many of the companies within the S&P 500 index, with a lot of those names reporting earnings this week, which is what we're going to be talking about for the bulk of this podcast today. But in coming to look real quick at the recent movement we've seen for the S&P 500, we actually see the broader index XPX on the website hitting a new all-time high intraday at a chart level of 4570 on its default chart there on the platform. This is rallied off a string of several consecutive all-time highs that we've been hitting here over the course of the past couple weeks after we saw the index pull back a little bit there in the September to early October timeframe. But nonetheless, that default chart now sits on two consecutive buy signals, and again, hitting up there at that all-time high. Also interesting to note, we're not in too heavily overbought territory, which is not necessarily a rare, but definitely not, it would not be surprising to see all-time highs coinciding with more overbought territory, but that's not necessarily the case, at least that we're seeing at the current structure of the broader market benchmark there with the S&P 500. But as we mentioned initially, big week for earnings this week. We have about 160 names, I believe, that are going to be reporting earnings from the S&P 500 at some point Monday through Friday. That equates to almost a third of the index from a straight constituent standpoint. So 32% of the index is going to be reporting at some time this week. And a lot of big names, some heavy hitters that are going to be out there reporting earnings. That really, for the bulk of this podcast, I wanted to highlight some of the bigger names that we're going to be taking a look at here. Make sure that you know the names to look at out on your horizon, whether it's names you own, you're looking to get into, or potentially looking to avoid some potential resistance and support levels that we can look toward as we move through the rest of this week. So go ahead and dive right into it. We start off there with one of the bigger names reporting on Monday. We won't take a run through, but Facebook is going to be reporting. Likely would have maybe already come out at the time this podcast is released. But moving into Tuesday, we have a couple real big names that we wanted to touch on. First of those being Alphabet, so ticker GOOGL. We can see that name is going to be reporting after market close on Tuesday, October 26th. Coming in and looking at Alphabet, we can see that stock is a 4 for 5er from an attribute perspective. It's maintained a favorable attribute threshold there since 2016. So since midway through 2016, it ticked up to a 3 for 5er and has been a 3-4 or a 5 for 5er since that time. We've seen some recent price movement has led to a little bit of consolidation after we reached a relative high there back in August up to chart level of 2912. We've seen some pullback subsequent rallies leading into a little bit of a triangle pattern that's beginning to form there on that default point and figure chart there for GOOGL. Movement today down just down barely this morning, at least at the time of this recording, ticking down to a chart level, adding another O at 2720. So we're going to see initial support coming in on the default chart there for Alphabet at 2624. If we did get a reversal higher, that potential reversal back up into X's would come at 2816, and we would get a second consecutive buy signal up to chart level of 2820. So some potential resistance coming in over top there at 2848. That initial support down at 2624 would give its first sell signal since May of this year. We're also right around the midpoint on its trading band, negative 17% oversold based upon market movement through Friday. So not too overbought, not too oversold, kind of really seemingly like the stock's just kind of waiting for those earnings to be released there. Again, overhead resistance 2848, lower support 2624. Favorable 4 for 5er, but definitely want to be taking a look and see which way this triangle breaks, either to the upside or the downside there with a potential reversal up. So moving there, the next name that we want to take a look at that's also going to be reporting earnings on Tuesday is Microsoft. So Microsoft, ticker MSFT on the platform, is one of the more consistent improvers that we've seen from these big mega cap technology names throughout the course of the past year plus, really. The default chart of Microsoft there has given 5 consecutive buy signals, with the most recent one occurring actually last week up at a chart level of 308 on that default chart. That consistency has led to relatively normalized trading range as well. We see the recent movement has led to just a 39% overbought reading. So again, pretty close, a little bit more toward the overbought side, but not by any means we would consider to be overextended. Microsoft strong 5 for fiber from an attribute perspective. Again, one of those more consistent and consistently favorable looking mega cap names, being a favorable attribute name since mid 2014. Also ranks in the top half of that software sector matrix. So a lot of good things that are going for Microsoft there. We can see initial support if we did get subsequent bad reaction to earnings later this week. Initial support would come in at 284, which would be slightly oversold territory there. And again, sitting there at that all-time chart high up at 308 and relatively normalized trading ranges. So those are two names that have relatively favorable pictures, certainly from a longer-term perspective, and definitely kind of from that intermediate to near-term perspective as well. Definitely want to keep a closer eye for any of these names we're going to be taking a look at. Keep a close eye on those potential support or resistance levels with earnings on the horizon. Make sure to set alerts on the site too. But there's also some names that might not quite that might have slightly different technical pictures there, Will.
Yeah, Ian, and one that comes to mind that we want to highlight today is Boeing, ticker BA. That is currently a 0 for fiber on the system, so no positive attributes from our side in its favor right now. And looking at the chart, it's trading on a point and figure sell signal. It is also bumping up against pretty key support at the 208 level, which it's nearing today at the time of this recording. That's going to be an important level to watch as we head into earnings. Breakout below 208 would be a spread quadruple bottom breakout, second consecutive sell signal. That would really add evidence to the fact that this is not a stock that we would looking to be adding exposure, at least at this time. On the other side, a bullish breakout for Boeing could come at around 236. That would be your maybe some original signs of life for this name. It's been a consistently weak attribute so far this year, though. It's down about 0.5% on the year, so and also an underperformer for that matter. We're not materially oversold heading into earnings, so we're not looking for a mean reversion or expecting a mean reversion bounce here, but something to watch. 208 would be the level for Boeing heading into earnings. Another name that we want to take a look at that doesn't have a beautiful looking chart, I would say, is Twitter. So ticker TWTR. They're also scheduled to report later this week. The stock today is down about 1%, testing its support level at $61. A bullish movement for Twitter would probably come with a reversal up into the mid 60s from current levels. On the downside, I mentioned you have support at 61 right here. You have additional support at $58. Breakouts below that would put you back towards the early June and May levels of the 2021 summer. Twitter, I would note, is currently a 5 attribute stock, so it's carrying all the positive longer term attributes that we look for, albeit it is one box away from breaking out into a negative trend. So should that happen, Twitter would move to at least a 4 attribute name. So that again is going to be a point of contention at around $61, $60 range is something to watch for as we head into earnings. It's been a pretty consistent high attribute name so far this year, Ian. It's up about 15% year to date. So nothing perhaps too snazzy to look at here. We're not oversold again from any of those near-term readings as well. Just something to watch on the downside for that support and trend break. And then lastly, a larger name and a lot of funds is going to be Amazon. This was a stock that we talked a fair amount about, Ian, that it was in a consolidated trading range really since August of 2020 all the way up and through June of this year. It broke out of that trading range in July at 35.84. It looked like it was going to resolve to the upside, set up for a potential shakeout pattern, and then ended up failing. And now Amazon is also fighting its bullish support line right now, which is currently sitting at around 3,200. A bullish break for Amazon here would be at 35.84. I think some further evidence would come into play with a break at 37.76, which would be a spread triple top and new all-time high for the stock. On the downside, you have support at 3,200. A breakout beneath that would give its second consecutive sell signal and continue a series of lower tops. Amazon is a 3 attribute stock right now, and should that sell signal happen, so that break at 31.68, the breakage of the 3,200 support, that 31.68 level would put it into weak attribute territory. So that's another something to keep on your radar. It's been a high attribute for the bulk of the past 6 years, so that could be a somewhat material change of technical picture here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean if you kind of squint your eyes and look at that Amazon chart, I mean it's a pretty tight range. I mean a wide range rather from a price perspective, but just in looking at from the point and figure perspective, definitely see that definitive range that we've been moving in, and slightly more to the upside over the past maybe 6 months or so, kind of since that big March decline, but definitely kind of right there smack dab in the middle of its trading range now. Is it kind of a consistent theme we've been seeing from a lot of these big names, kind of waiting to see what the information flow is going to look like, waiting to see what these earnings pictures are going to look like, which makes it ever more important to note those support and resistance levels. The final name that we're going to be touching on here today is another name that is reporting on Thursday, like Amazon, which is one of the if not the biggest name, actually, Apple, ticker AAPL on the platform. Again, another 3 for 5er from an attribute perspective, but it's shown a little bit more recent improvement, or kind of rallying from the late September, early October pullback that we saw from many of these big technology names. It's rallied back from giving a sell signal back at the beginning of October at 140 to currently sit at a price point of 150 after adding an additional X this past Friday. That sell signal that it gave in October was the first sell signal given since March of this year. Prior to that, it gave 3 consecutive buy signals, reached a new all-time high up at 156 in September. Saw that pullback, which at the end of the day, pullbacks aren't necessarily always a bad thing for stocks. Definitely see that price, the trading range normalize, certainly for Apple, with that normalized weekly overbought reading of just 11% based upon movement through Friday there. Again, 3 for 5er from an attribute perspective. So Apple has been a favorable attribute name, like many of the others, for several years. Back midway through 2016, it flipped to a favorable 3 for 5er, and it's continued to maintain that favorable status since that time. But definitely going to want to take note of that support level at 140 that we got to earlier this month. Potential resistance, we would move back to a buy signal with movement to 158. So that resistance point at 156, we did get a push to the upside. Is definitely going to be that potential point to monitor there, that prior all-time high from September. But get some recent flips to positive weekly momentum, rather. Definitely going to be a positive sign as we're heading in towards earnings this Thursday. So some positives, some negatives, but definitely kind of more on the positive side there as we're looking toward the release for Apple. But with that, I mean, we're going to be a lot of other names that you could potentially look at. I mean, you got some of the biggest names we didn't necessarily touch on today just for the sake of time. Didn't want to have everyone on here for several hours on this Monday afternoon. But you got big names like Starbucks, like eBay, Ford, GM. So a lot of names to potentially look at there, a lot of stuff potentially coming on the horizon. And if any of those names are something that you're looking towards or you're potentially holding now, like we touched on initially, definitely be sure to go and utilize those alerts on the platform. You can set an alerts for anything, whether it's for portfolio alerts or for individual securities. And that way, regardless of what the earnings picture lets happen there for the price of the chart movement, you'll be notified of any potential changes to the technical picture for those names. So with that, I think we wrapped up just about most of what we were looking to touch on here this afternoon. So thank everyone very much for joining us here this Monday, and we look forward to talking with you all next week in November.